Hello again, it's Anthony Manganello with your fourth Debt-Free Academy Protege lesson. Now, this lesson is about the financial myth that budgeting is necessary in order to succeed financially. Now, it seems that just about anywhere you go looking for help with your personal finances, there's one common thread, one thing that all of the other strategies have in common, and that's the use of a budget. Now, don't get me wrong. Using a budget can be helpful. I mean, for many people, it can be a real eye-opening experience to see how much money you're actually spending on a regular basis. Now, when we were doing personal cash flow analyses with consumers, one thing we found interesting, I mean even amusing, was that when we worked with their numbers and showed them that they were falling behind each month, those folks couldn't believe it. I mean, they thought they had everything covered. And then when we helped someone discover that they could actually pay all their bills with their monthly income, they were shocked to find out that they weren't falling behind each month. Now, the point is that a budget, for the purposes of discovering where your money is going, can be a good thing. But in this lesson, I'm going to share with you something that I believe will make that little light bulb in your head kind of go on. And you'll see that budgeting, while possibly being better than doing nothing at all, accomplishes only half of what you really need to accomplish. Now, let's take a look at what our old friend Merriam-Webster has to say about budgeting. Now, there are several definitions. We're going to zero in on just one of them, and that one is a budget is a statement of the financial position of an administration for a definite period of time based on estimates of expenditures during the period and proposals for financing them. When it comes to a personal budget, you are the administration, and the expenses are things like your mortgage or rent payments and all of your debt payments like credit card payments or car payments. And obviously there's your living expenses. And the proposal for financing those expenses, well, that's your household's total net monthly income. Pretty simple, right? Now, I'm going to use the Fortunato family example again to demonstrate how budgeting can actually create a worse financial situation. So just imagine these are your numbers, and here's how that budget would look. Total net monthly income is $4,600. Monthly living expenses, $1,600. Secured debt payments per month is $2,173, so that's for house and car payments, and then 4 credit cards are costing you $402 a month. With these numbers, you have $425 left over each month. That's pretty good. Now, a couple of quick notes here. First, you may think that the living expenses, well, they may seem to be a little high. Well, let me put that $1,600 in context. This is the amount, it's not just for utilities and food, it's the category that covers everything. I'm talking about gas for both cars, your property insurance and property taxes, cell phones, clothes, even how much money you spend every year on vacations and birthday and Christmas presents, everything. And this number is a pretty average number from what we've seen in over 20,000 analyses we've done with folks just like you. Now, in a later lesson, you're going to walk through a worksheet where they'll show you just how much you're spending each and every month. Now, that amount, it may just surprise you. Now, the second note is that the $425 a month that you would have left over, if you remember, in the previous lesson, we talked about the pay yourself first strategy. Now, if these were your numbers and you were to sit down with a financial advisor, one of those traditional guys, they'd probably encourage you to pay yourself first with that money and start socking it away for retirement right now, or maybe towards the kid's college education. And you would probably feel pretty good about doing this. Now, that's a pretty decent situation to be in. I mean, how would you feel if you had over $400 left over every month? Everything's paid for. Pretty good, right? Have you ever heard the story about a frog in boiling water? It's the one where you're told that if you drop a frog in boiling water, it'll promptly and frantically hop the heck right out of there. No hesitation, no delay, just an immediate response and a deliberate escape. But if you put that same frog in a pot of water that's just lukewarm and then slowly turn up the heat so that the water temperature slowly comes to a boil, the frog won't be able to tell the difference and it will simply boil to death. That's because the temperature changes so gradually that the frog's body temperature continues to adjust until it's too late and you wind up with frog soup. When you follow common budgeting techniques, you also run the risk of slowly being boiled to death in a financial way. What the heck am I talking about? Let me explain. Let's take another peek at the Fortunato budget and imagine these are your numbers. Now, there are 3 things, let's call them budgetary heating elements, that can essentially turn the heat up on you very gradually, which can slowly lead you to boiling to death financially. Now, the first budgetary heating element is something I call misguided focus. Let's look at what most people focus on when they use a budget. When using a budget, your attention is invariably drawn to the bottom of the page where the balance is. Now, you're hoping to see a positive number there, right? Of course you are. And if you are fortunate enough to have a budget like the one we're talking about here with hundreds of dollars being left over, that kind of budget would be considered successful. I mean, why not? You've got all of your bills paid, all of them, and you got some pretty healthy dough left over, hundreds of dollars. Or maybe the budget is like, the kind that most people have, and that number at the bottom, it's maybe a little small, maybe even it's negative. Well, then your attention is drawn, or focus is drawn to the numbers in the middle of the page, those expenses. And you do everything you can to lower those numbers so you can make the small or negative number at the bottom healthy and positive, right? Now let's assume that even if you have a small or negative number down here, that you've played with all the numbers in the middle of the page and you got the bottom number to become fairly healthy. How do you feel? What do you feel? When that bottom number is healthy, you feel pretty good, right? Good enough to create a feeling of comfort. Here's the problem. That feeling of comfort can lead you to a false sense of security. Why? Because you think that if you have a balanced budget, one that can safely and comfortably satisfy all of your monthly expenses, you can become comfortable. And it's this kind of budgetary comfort that can slowly turn up the temperature on you financially. Now here's what I mean. The first heating element, misguided focus, has you focusing on creating a healthy budgetary balance. And that leads to overlooking the most important number in any budget. Now, do you know what that number is? It's this one, the one at the top. Your income is the most important number in any budget. Now, this is not to say that the other numbers on the budget, well, they're not important, because they are. But what I am saying is that if you allow all of your focus to be directed at the bottom number and only focus on making that bottom number one that's a healthy, positive number, you run the risk of becoming complacent and comfortable when you achieve that goal. Because when you think your budget is complete, you fail to realize something very, very important. That very important thing is a second budgetary heating element, which is something I call income mortality. Now, income mortality is exactly what the name says. Your income, whatever that number is most definitely not immortal. It will one day come to an end. But when you're feeling comfortable, knowing that your budget is balanced and all of your bills are paid, and heck, you've even got some money left over, a few $100 left over, your effort to work your budget seems to come to rest. The only time you should feel comfortable when that bottom number is healthy is when your income, the number at the top, is not being generated by a job or something that requires you to work regularly to create it. Now, do you remember what I said earlier about conceiving, believing, and achieving your wealth potential? How the ultimate objective of your Debt Free Academy membership is to teach you how to get to a place where your expenses are comfortably being paid, but not from you having to go to work to generate the income so that you have enough money to pay them, but from some kind of an investment portfolio. One that doesn't require you to be alarmed out of bed in the morning so that you can go trade your precious hours for dollars. Well, the only way to get to that type of place is to focus not on the bottom number, but on the top number, and to realize that one day that number at the top was just going to disappear. To focus not on budgeting, but to focus on something different. And instead of thinking in terms of budgeting, you need to think in terms of cash flow. Cash flow in a business has the business owner focused more on the top number than the number on the bottom. Of course, a business owner pays attention to all of the numbers involved, but he knows that the number on the top, that has to be a number that is consistently and reliably counted on. And that's the way you need to think. You just might be taking that number for granted. You need to think in terms of using the income from your job or career to replace the income from your job or career. And to successfully accomplish this, you need to understand what's happening between the top and the bottom numbers. Understanding what's happening in the middle of the page is to understand the third budgetary heating element, which is something I call income corrosion. Income corrosion takes place when the numbers in the middle of the page work against your ultimate objective, which is achieving your personal wealth potential. The one that you learned about in the beginning. Now, here's what I mean. Now, bear with me because we're going to work a few more numbers here. And I want to remind you that learning how these numbers work will help you overcome all the hurdles in place between you and achieving your personal wealth potential. Okay, you know you're going to have living expenses, and sure, you can do what you can to make sure that you're not being wasteful and being frugal. But when you think about this category, you realize that you got to live. I mean, that's why they're called living expenses. So while you do need to be frugal and reasonable here, this category really can't go away because you're going to have to eat and pay utilities and taxes and other expenses in this category for the rest of your life in order to live. And isn't actually having a life what it's all about anyway? But these two categories, secured and unsecured debt, are expenses that have balances. That means if these balances disappear, so does the expense or the payment. Now, are you beginning to follow me here? Now, perhaps you've made the mistake believing that your have a life satisfaction is funded here in these two categories. Because when you purchase something with credit and debt, it usually feels pretty good. But what's really happening in these two categories is corroding your income from the inside out and making it nearly impossible for you to use your personal cash flow to replace the number at the top of the page. And you often overlook these two categories if the bottom number, that one at the balance, is kind of healthy. But by learning how to properly deal with these two categories, you can make achieving your personal wealth potential possible. Take a moment and compare the total for these two categories of debt with the category that has living in its title. You're probably spending much less money on living than you are on debt. And we already covered how the debt dollar drain works and how it will put you in a position where you have to generate about $3, give or take, in gross income for every single dollar of debt that you currently owe. Let's take another look at how debt acts as kind of a corrosive enzyme to achieving your wealth potential. Now, using these numbers again, I'm going to demonstrate to you exactly how corrosive debt can be. We already went through the debt dollar drain and how it works, and as powerful a revelation as that can be, that's one that's experienced over a long period of time. But here, I'm going to show you how much debt is costing you right now. Here's what I mean. You have your payment, house payments and car payments and credit card payments, right? The house and car payments are debt that incurs something called simple interest. The credit card payments incur something called revolving or compound interest. I'll explain those more in a later lesson. But for now, we're going to focus on what's happening in a single month when these payments are made. And you're about to see how what you may think are low interest rates can be as high as 60% or more. Now just check this out. Let's say you're in the 5th year of your mortgage and you're making mortgage payment number 62. One of the cars is on payment 15 and the other is on payment 18. The payment number is important for these types of debt because of those amortization tables I talked about before. For simple interest loans, the payment number from the amortization schedule determines how much is going to be applied towards the principal of the loan and how much is going to be lost to the interest. I want to show you an example of how much of what you're forking out now in this kind of a month is being applied towards debt principal and how much you're losing to interest. And just so that I can be sure you're tracking with me, interest, that's the profit your lenders make off of each of your payments. So for these payments, you fork out $2,575. Guess what amount is applied towards principal? Are you ready for this? $1,082.61. And $1,492.39 is applied toward interest. In other words, you're being charged almost $1,500 to use that $1,082 that month. That is insane. Look at it this way. Of that $2,575 in total debt payments that month, 60% is interest. To me, that sounds like you're paying 60% interest. What do you think your numbers are? One thing you should know is that they're probably pretty close percentage-wise. Now, while the amounts may be bigger or smaller, the percentages, well, they'll be somewhat, in the same ballpark because debt is usually proportionate to income. Think about what, year you're in your current mortgage if you have one. And have you been seduced into refinancing over and over again because of, the opportunity to lower your payment? Now, here's something very important that you really need to know. If you're in the first 7 years of your mortgage, depending on the interest of your loan, between 79 and 86% of your payment is profit to the mortgage company each month. Now, I know you've been hearing a lot about those lower bargain basement interest rates and how it's the lowest in history. Seems like we keep hearing about mortgage refinancing rates plummeting to the, through the floor. If you're one of the fortunate few who actually qualified for a bargain basement interest like, say, 4% over 30 years, the first 7 years of that mortgage, the interest that you'll be wasting is 65% of each payment for the first 84 months. Let's take one last look at the numbers from a different perspective. If these were your numbers and you had $425 left over, you'd think that's pretty successful, pretty good budget. But this month you're paying $1,500 in interest, which is 3.5 times as much as that $425. That's why I call this income corrosion. Because while you may be making all of your payments and you think you're getting ahead because you got something left over and you're paying yourself first, even if it's with a few $100 each month, the interest you're paying is corroding your income from the inside out. And that's why budgeting, as it's taught by most financial gurus, it just doesn't work today, because it completely overlooks the internal corrosive impact of debt and credit interest. And that's why the first step to achieving your personal wealth potential is to completely eliminate every penny of debt. And once you've accomplished this, you can then turn all of those debt payments into some real wealth building blocks to build not just a nest egg, but a retirement fortress. One of the most common questions I get is, how is it possible to become debt-free so quickly? Well, the answer to that is simple. Taking these numbers again, you have a total of $238,273.25 in total debt, and you bring home $4,600 in net pay each month. Think about what your numbers are and follow along with me in this explanation, and you'll see how it's completely and totally possible to become debt-free so quickly. Now, when you multiply that total debt amount by 2, you get $476,546.50. Now take your net income and annualize it by multiplying it by 12, so you get the annual net income. In this case, it would be $4,600 times 12, which would equal $55,200 in net annual income. When you divide the amount that's twice what you owe, in this case it's the $476,546.50, and you divide it by the annualized net income, or the $55,200, you get 8.6. So what's the significance of the number 8.6? Simple. That means in just a little over 8.5 years, you would bring home twice what you owe. So the question isn't, how is it possible to become debt-free so quickly? The question is, how come it's not possible? Well, guess what? That's what you're going to learn as we continue through your Protégé course. But first, remember, you have to get beyond merely conceiving, what's possible. You have to also begin to believe that it's possible in order for you to achieve the goals that we're talking about. And the point is that in the first few lessons, it's to demonstrate, how you may have trouble believing how you can achieve that personal wealth potential you have. It's because what you've learned up until now is either outdated or has been shoved down your throat by people lending you the money. I mean, how often do you hear about people talking about, I'm going to pay off my house in just a handful of years? Instead, you've been led to believe, like everyone else, you're going to have a house payment for the rest of your life. And the best thing you can do is refinance, so maybe you can lower your payments. Isn't that what you've been told? What you may not have known until now is that when you keep doing that, you remain in the early years of your mortgage, and you continue to lose the vast majority of all of your payments to interest and profit for the mortgage company. So instead of merely lowering your payments, how about eliminating those payments? And instead of lowering your interest, what about completely eliminating the interest? Which would you prefer? I'm sure you prefer to completely eliminate all of those payments and as much of the interest as possible, right? Well, if that assumption is accurate, then keep moving forward through these lessons, because that is exactly what you're going to learn. I'll see you in the next lesson.